Hello, Story Wilson with RSWSolutions.com. This is a 1996 P38 Range Rover. It has the 4.6 liter GEMS engine in it. And we're at 150,000 miles and we are ready for a new head gasket, which is pretty impressive. I believe the service records indicate the last head gasket was at about somewhere on the order of 50,000 miles. So this is a 100,000 mile head gasket, really impressive. I'm going to go through some of the steps to get this done. Of course, refer to your rave manual, the Land Rover rave manual, for the exact instructions, and please don't take my instructions as the gospel truth, because this will be the first time I've actually done head gaskets. So let's go over some of the things we're going to dive into today, some of the tools we've got. Let's go over, all the tools are over here. Let's take a quick look. So in the process of changing the head gaskets, of course, we're going to need coolant and new engine oil. We're going to have some gasket remover materials, some brake clean, some assembly grease, some PV blaster, gloves. We also have an automotive aluminum straight edge, or steel straight edge. It has to be, this one is tolerant to 1/1000th of an inch, so we can check the tolerances of the block deck and the heads. We have a Victor Rice head gasket set and just gasket set. So of course we need to replace the valley pan and the exhaust manifold gaskets and the valve cover gaskets. They're all here. We have some Beck Armley head bolts. Of course, you need new head bolts. I also managed to source a set of heads that have been remanufactured, so I will be able to go into this assembly knowing that I have heads. I don't need to take them to a machine shop, and so that'll be a nice way to speed up the process. You're also going to need a good torque wrench. Since I'm saving so much money doing this myself, I went out and bought an Eastwood digital torque wrench with torque angle as well as the torque force. That'll be handy. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's just start tearing off the top of that engine and we'll get started. So getting started, we're really just going to focus on a few of the minor things here. You're absolutely going to have to disconnect the battery. It's just silly not to. I mean, I know we're going to have to do a bunch of things to get the BECM back in operation, but you just need to disconnect the battery because we're going to take off the alternator. I went ahead and opened the door to the vehicle so that we're absolutely not going to trigger the alarm. But we're going to take off this, disconnect the battery. So let's go ahead and pull off the cooling fan. This is a 36mm wrench and this holds it. Remember, it always unscrews in the direction the fan rotates. So that'll be this way. And let's see if we can get this lined up properly. And there we go. Alright, we really don't want to damage the radiator, so we're going to take a piece of cardboard here, one of our shipping boxes, and simply thread that right in front of the radiator so that no errand tools or arms will hit the radiator. 15mm socket on the idler pulley. Release the tension of the CERT belt, and we get our CERT belt out. Now would be a good time to replace it as well. If you haven't, this one, I would imagine, is in pretty decent shape. Make quick work of the intake plenum here. This is pretty darn simple stuff. So far, we're not doing anything really complicated, are we? So, this car is 20 years old, and to be honest, it's been a pretty good car. I'm impressed that this head gasket has lasted as long as it has. I think the later model engines, especially with the Bosch, really were more prone to head gasket failures. I'm not sure why, but this one's got 100,000 miles. It's really impressive. Most people's don't last 60 to 80, but I guess it all depends on who did the head gasket job, doesn't it? Hopefully I'll be able to keep this running for another 100. Alright, so let's start getting this intake plenum off. We're going to need to remove some of these hoses, and this is a 6mm Allen. So make sure that we've drained the coolant. I just drained the coolant out of the main radiator into a nice big huge 5-gallon bucket. Then we're going to make sure we release these clamps and hoses. These are hoses that carry coolant to a heating block under the throttle body so that we get hot, so we heat up the intake air temperature. Alright, we got the bolts out, we got the cooling lines off, we got all the emissions control off, we've got the throttle cables off, transmission tunnel, transmission dipstick bracket off. I went ahead and pried it up a little bit here off the valve cover and went all the way around. It should come right off now. Yeah, alright. We're in business. Looks pretty good. So let's begin to take these cooling lines off. I'm gonna have to anyway. There we go. So I've got a little dental pick here, and what I can do is grab each of these clips right there and just kind of bring it out away from the connector, and that will allow me to prise this injector connector. Be able to unwind this harness around here. Good. Let's just tuck this over here. Let's go ahead and drain the fuel from the rail. See if there's any pressure here. I'm just going to take a rag and a Phillips and just kind of depress this ever so gently. Removing valve covers, an 8mm socket. Also come out pretty easily. Alright, here we go. So now we're ready to take off the actual intake manifold. Everything's been disconnected. We've got wiring harnesses, injectors, sensors, the fuel lines are off. The only thing that hasn't been removed, we're going to go ahead and pop off the spark plugs because the coil pack assembly will lift away. It's attached to this. But we're just going to go ahead and start now and disassemble this completely from the engine. And oh yeah. There we go. There we go. One GEMS motor manifold. Pretty clean. Alright, so we've made pretty good progress. You know, we're going to get these intake valleys, this intake valley gasket off, and we're going to be really close. Moving forward here on the exhaust manifolds, and then the rocker arm assemblies will come out, and then the heads will come off. Everything's just 13mm. 13mm sockets. 13mm wrenches on everything here. And here we go. The internals of the engine there. That looks pretty good. I was told, you know, don't worry too much if you get any coolant running down here. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. Afterwards, we're going to flush this with tons and tons of brake clean, and all the brake clean and the coolant will go down into the sump, and that, of course, that will all get, we'll clear all that out when we do our oil change at the end of the job. We need to begin to take off this heat shield, and this is probably going to be one of the most time-consuming parts of the job. has the highest potential for seized up bolts. So these heat shields are in fact pretty difficult to get off. Like I said, it's a 8mm bolt, and there are a couple I had to hit with a torch. I just used a MAP gas torch was enough, and some penetrating oil to get this stuff started. I think there's just one bolt left. There we go. So this is kind of what we're looking at here. There we go. Just a heat shield. All in all, not terribly difficult. This one I managed to persuade the last bolt off with some heat. I was afraid I was going to have to Dremel it off, but I got lucky. So take your time. I think I got lucky with this. I think the last person in here did the right thing and had some anti-seize on the bolts. Alright, let's just see how much these exhaust manifolds are going to fight us here. I got a 12mm socket with a breaker bar, and let's hope this is going to be easy. Let's just get an idea what this is going to be like. Well, that was not great. Yeah, that's not great. It's a lot of pressure. That one's easy. So maybe they're not all going to be difficult. We'll have to maybe put some heat on this and see what happens.
But what if it's a bamboo? That's not a tree, that's grass.
That's grass, yeah.
What if it's a mangrove?
It sounds like you've been smoking grass.
What I want to know is, who is this woman?
Yeah, why did she have a son? No, I'm thinking about this. Your answer is so wrong. I don't think you can imagine how wrong it is.
Well, I drew a little picture, and then unencumbered by the thought process.
That'll do it every time. 1-888-CAR-TALK or 1-888-227-8255. Hello.
Okay, I'll warn you, this actually took quite a bit more time than I was expecting. There were, all it takes is one bolt to really give you a hard time, and these exhaust manifold bolts took some heat and some persuasion before they decided to give up. Okay, the exhaust manifolds have been removed from the block, and we're going to begin to take off the rocker arm assemblies. I've already got the left side of the engine done. I'm going to work to the right side. I'm going to be removing. Wow. Let's get the breaker bar. When undoing these rocker arm bolts, make sure to move in small increments through across the whole range. Don't undo one bolt all at one time. You don't want the rocker arm to be untorqued unevenly. Once we have those bolts undone, I made up a piece of cardboard to hold each of the push rods. Simply remove them. Make sure the orientation is preserved. You don't want to install them upside down. You also don't want to put them in the wrong place. And you definitely want to put them back exactly where they came from in the proper order. Go through all of them, put them in your cardboard. Alright, so we're going to begin the removal of head bolts. And the head bolts need to be removed in a very specific pattern, the reverse of how you tighten them. That's how they need to be removed, so we don't put any unnecessary forces that may warp the head. The removal pattern is going to be, so there's 5 bolts in the valve cover area, and there's 5 bolts right here next to the spark plugs, basically. The pattern is going to be like 1 in this bottom left corner, then 2 in the upper right, and then 3, and back over here 4. You get the idea. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, starting with 1, perhaps the most difficult one to get to. I have a 5/8 socket with an extension that can kind of swivel a little bit. Makes it a lot easier. And we're just going to start by, we're not going to undo them entirely, we're just going to see if we can crack them. Oh, and they're going to be hard to move. The idea is we're going to loosen them about maybe, I don't know, 30 degrees or so. move on to the next one, and then go back and do it again and again and again until all the tension has been released from the head. Again, do not want to warp the head at all. So breaking the torque on these bolts was a heck of a lot more difficult than I expected. It took about a 4-foot breaker bar with an extension to snap these. And about the first 45 degrees where all the torque was, and then they came out quite easily. So I'm going to pull these out. Remember, we're using new head bolts, so we don't care about these. Just going to get them out, and then we can pull the head off and take a look and see how the deck of the block looks and see how much work we're going to have to do cleaning the deck of this block. Before we pull the head off, we're going to need to remove this bracket that holds the idler tension pulley. I believe we're going to have to also remove this wiring harness before we can get to the bolts behind there. Now comes the fun part. We're going to finally pull this head off. This bracket's been removed and it's just sitting here forward. It's not going to go anywhere with the wiring harness keeping it there. Now when this head comes off, a pretty good amount of coolant will come out of the back of the head here, out of the engine. So be aware of that. And as mentioned previously, make sure when you remove the head you come straight off. You don't let it bang back into the deck, because you can always remachine a head, but you can't remachine the deck of the block. There we go. Now, coolant and oil is going to slide back into the cylinders. That's inevitable. We will just make sure and clean all that. And clean all that off when we do our oil change. The block looks okay, the gasket looks okay. I had a failure in the front cooling jacket that carries coolant up into the head, and I was seeping oil and coolant down the face of the block. Everything looks okay. I don't have any steam clean cylinders, that's good. And we'll go ahead and tidy this up and take a closer look. Went ahead and soaked up some of the coolant that was in the valley and the cylinders. Wow, look at that. Pretty good for a gasket. It's been on there 100,000 miles. I did not expect it to come off so quickly. That's going to be really easy to prep too. So the failure on mine, aha, right there. There's the failure on mine. You see how the gasket material is blown out along the cooling passageways? Aha, and that was where the oil contamination came from. So looks like I was getting, I'm not sure if that's that's a bolt, but I was getting oil and coolant coming out of the front side of the engine, so that way, and that would explain probably where the coolant was coming from, and maybe some of the oil. Okay, to remove this side of the cylinder head block, we had to remove this bracket that holds the power steering pump, and here's the AC compressor still attached to its lines, of course. There's a small bracket on the back which holds this wiring harness. Make sure to remove these bolts in the pattern as specified in the rave manual. You have to untorque these properly. You don't want to add any more stresses to the block. And you will need a breaker bar. These are on there pretty good. We're only going to release about maybe 45 degrees of movement on here. There we go. Yeah, like that. Now we're going to go to the second bolt, which is back here. Move through the pattern nice and slow, and then go back and do it a second and a third time. Just release the tension evenly on the head. Alright, so we've got everything undone. The bolts are undone in the correct sequence. All the brackets are off, accessories are off. This head should just come right out. Again, make sure you don't drop it back onto the block deck. You don't want to mess that up. See if I can get this out without breaking my back. There we go. Oh, there's that coolant. Lovely. Ta-da! And let's take a look. So don't worry about the coolant. It's inevitable. We'll get all this coolant out of the cylinders when we change the oil. This gasket doesn't have real obvious signs of leaking, but there is a lot of oil buildup here and coolant buildup right here on the face of the block. The deck looks pretty good. It's really clean. Nice news. Not a lot of cleanup. So next we need to do is prep the surface, clean everything up, and yeah, I can see some degradation, some thinning of the gasket here. It's really thin right here. Really thin. That's probably what allowed the coolant to escape out the front of the block. So, next step, prep, surface prep. So we've got remanufactured aluminum heads to go on here. We don't have to worry about machining those, resurfacing and redecking the old heads, because we've got new ones. And all we got to do is clean this surface up, get the new gaskets in, new heads, and torque everything properly, and it should be a good job done. Everything's off. We got to clean this block deck to a mirror smooth finish. Now, there's a debate on the internet on what you can get away with doing. Lots of people like to use those Roloc discs, maybe abrasive discs, Scotch-Brite pads, and those, I think that's probably the general consensus is that's a terrible idea. What you really don't want to do is dig into the deck, even microscopically, even on the, even on the thousandth of an inch level. You don't want to dig into the deck and unlevel it. You unlevel this deck, and this head job will never seal right. So I think we're going to take a stab at cleaning this, just a little elbow grease. And last night sprayed this block down a little bit. So this block actually looks really clean. I wonder how far we can get with just a paper towel, and that's pretty good, actually. Tricky spot will be right there. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. I let this sit overnight, and I'm pretty happy with how clean this is able to get it with just a simple pass with a towel. Also, we can use these plastic razors and a scraping tool. Like this guy. Let's say that's pretty reasonable. These are plastic. They're not going to hurt anything. So, nice and slow. Just plastic. It's not really going to gouge aluminum. And what I'm going to make sure to do is get those ridges off the combustion ring there. Get the carbon ridges off that. But this is going to be a pretty easy cleaning job. So make it as clean as absolutely possible, and then we're going to wipe it down really well. We can't have any grease on there. We don't want any contaminants whatsoever on the block. One of the things we need to do in preparation, we've already covered getting this valve, or getting the block deck as clean as possible without any abrasive materials. We need to prep these bolt holes, the head bolt holes. You make sure they're cleaned out first. There's no liquid in them because there'll be coolant or oil in them. So we've got a compressed air and a rag. We're just going to kind of blow out anything that's in there first. And look at that, there's sludge in there on all 10 of them. Then what I'm going to do is take some fresh motor oil and coat the head bolt. So I'm just going to dip this head bolt in some motor oil here. This is one of the old ones I took out. I'm going to keep the new ones as perfect as possible. Make sure this head bolt is clean and oiled. And then we're just going to, for example, in this hole, we're just going to thread it in there. I'm going to chase the thread here just to make sure there's nothing blocking this thread. Just going to hand tighten. There's no need to get crazy with this. Just going to chase this thread with some fresh motor oil for an inch or two down, as far as we need to go, and do that for all the holes. And then I'm going to go back and blow the holes out again. I want to make sure they're absolutely clean and that they're oiled and lubricated and ready for our new head bolts, and they'll all go in roughly the same initial torque to spec. We won't have any issues with uneven torque loading on these bolts. So we're ready to start cleaning this deck here. There's no more oil. We don't want any oil contamination on the surface. You could use some brake clean. I've got some grease and wax remover for body work. That should be adequate. And we're going to go in one direction here and just keep wiping off and stuff like that. Fold our rag, go again. And we'll do this 2 or 3 times. We really want to make sure that our surface is as clean and as oil-free as possible. I know it's being a little OCD, but I would rather spend an extra 10 minutes cleaning this than ever having to do this again. And we're just going to make sure that there is no oil residue on the head of this block here. Alright, we're going to call this good. This is about as clean as I can get this block. There's still some discoloration around the water jackets where the coolant passageways are, but there's no variation of the surface. I can't feel any variation with my fingernail. Calling that pretty good. Here are our new gaskets. Notice that gaskets are marked. This is marked as top. Also, the top is always usually where the letters are on the top, and so there's the name brand there, Victor Reinz. And the fire rings are also joined on the top. On the bottom, the fire rings are separate. So there's a lot of, this is definitely the top. We're going to keep this gasket as oil-free as possible. Remember, we can't contaminate this with any oil. Our decks have been clean, the heads have been clean, we're ready to start. Gasket that is marked correctly as top, and the letters are facing up, and the fire rings are the right direction. We have our freshly cleaned, remanufactured new springs and valves and valve guides, our head. So the idea is to drop this on nice and slowly, one movement, not adding any contamination to the block surface. We want to find those locating pins in one try. Right there. Ta-da! Nice and easy. I didn't really make any real contact until the very last push. That is nice and seated on the guide pins, and we're ready to work with some head bolts here. I'm going to get the other side fixed up. This is just kind of a lint-free rag, one last pass. Make sure that nasty old shop towel didn't leave any fibers on this. All right, we're ready for this side. Gasket is sitting on the locating pins. We've got our new remanufactured head. Gonna go in here. Again, the idea is we don't touch anything until right on the locating pins. Just gently down. Everything looks good. A little higher. There we go. There's one pin. There's 2 pins right there. Now, once we sit this head on the gasket, we're committed. You know, there's no removing this and rechecking things and doing it again. Once we start to put pressure down on this head and this gasket, it's done. There's no going back. We can't, if that happens, you know, we need new head gaskets if we take this block back off. All right, that went really well, better than I expected. We got the heads on the block perfectly without any movement of the gasket, and they just went right onto the locating pins, no moving around. So the next part, we're going to work on these head bolts. These are new head bolts, always on new head bolts. The next part's a little bit controversial. People aren't quite sure how to prep the head bolts. This is just one way. I would say you definitely don't want to put the head bolts in dry, but you don't want them soaking in oil either. These have just been lightly doused in some engine oil, clean synthetic engine oil. And I'm going to put them in. You know, we went to so much effort to clean the head and gasket, you know, and the block of any oil contamination. We don't want to contaminate it now. But we want to put these long bolts in the positions 1, 3, and 5, top here. And just going to give it a couple of turns. There we go. And these short bolts go in all the other, 7 short bolts go in all the other positions. So again, the first tightening is to torque spec, and then after that we do angle. So we're just going to do 15 foot-pounds or 20 newton meters first in the proper sequence. Bolt 1, And this doesn't really... There we go. And bolt 2. There we go. Okay, now's where it gets interesting. We've already torqued each bolt to the proper torque to spec in the proper order, and now we're ready to switch over to angle. We're not really interested in how hard we're torquing the bolt now. We're actually more interested in how far we take the tightening. So this is we're going to do a 90-degree movement on each of the bolts in the order, and then we'll go back and do 90 degrees again, and then we're done. We walk away, we're done. So this torque wrench will tell me how far I've gone. It starts off at 0 degrees, and as I move through, it tells me we want to do a nice sweeping movement, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Now I can come back. And there we go, 90. So I'm just going back and doing the final 90-degree tightening. So remember, to recap, it's 15 foot-pounds of torque on each bolt in the pattern, and it's 90-degree turn on each bolt in the pattern, and then it's a final 90-degree turn on each bolt in the pattern, in that order. So just finishing up, and it will get difficult. So 90 degrees on that bolt. We're pretty much done. All we need to do now is reassemble everything in the reverse order we took it all apart. Do an oil change. Do a coolant refill. Bleed the engine of air. And we're done. So that was pretty much it. You know, I would rate this job in the advanced kind of category, just because there are so many areas that you can screw it up. And you know, it's yet to be seen. I may have screwed this up. I don't even know yet. But you know, when you put things back together, like the exhaust manifold bolts, go ahead and use some copper grease or some anti-seize grease. Especially with the heat shield bolts, you know, you'll want to use stainless. If you have some stainless bolts laying around, you can use or you can find, and treat them with copper or anti-seize grease as well. And just tidy everything up as you go. And you know, hopefully this video was useful in some way. I noticed there weren't really any videos describing this process on a Land Rover 4.0 or 4.6 block. So again, it's really not that tough. Just take your time. Really be careful when you clean things. You don't want to damage any of the aluminum surfaces. And hopefully this helped. Thanks for watching.